Thank you very much, Senator Saviello, Representative Welch, members of the committee. Good morning. I am Patricia Aho. I am the Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Protection, and I'm speaking in support of the revised LD 750 under consideration by this committee today. Before I start, I just would like to personally thank all members of this committee for taking the significant amount of time that you have done so over the last 4 months. I have participated in public policy going on 31 years now in Augusta, and I think that in my recollection, the work that you have done in the past 4 months is almost unprecedented, at least in my memory, for the amounts of briefings, the work sessions, and the diligence that you have put into understanding the science, as well as the information related to the regulatory processes. I thank you because I think your work on the provisionally adopted rules has actually made them more clear and easier to understand by all involved. We are supporting LD 750 as you have proposed it and is before you today because most of these changes provide for clarity, as I've said, which we think is important for any potential applicant, to us at the DEP, and to the public as well. There are only 2 sections of the proposal in front of you today that I would like to take just a couple moments to raise before you because they provide us with some concerns. The first is in Section 5, Number 5 of your proposed bill, which is located on page 2 of the May 1st, 2015 OPLA Office of Policy and Legal Analysis draft. And that requires the department to define passive treatment using the term self-maintaining. The draft does not define the term self-maintaining, and as written, we believe this could preclude standards and necessary maintenance activities such as mowing or the preventing tree growth near a waste unit liner. So we believe that if you adopt Section 5, Number 5, we would recommend that the section be further amended to clarify that closure and post-closure maintenance standards, which are actually in Section 24 of the provisionally adopted rules, are considered self-maintaining, so that certain activities such as mowing, preventing tree growth, those would be considered part of that particular definition. Those standards in Section 24, for your own reference, start on page 71 of the rules, just for your own reference. Secondly, Section 5, Number 18 of the proposed bill, again, I'm looking on page 4 of the May 1st, 2015 OPLA draft, prohibits mining from lands under great ponds and from submerged lands. This conflicts with another set of laws, specifically Title 12, Section 549.12, which already allows for mining on state lands. Section 5, Number 18 also conflicts with Section 5, Number 17, which specifically allows mining conducted pursuant to Title 12, Chapter 201, Capital A, Subchapter 3. To resolve this inconsistency, we recommend that the committee remove Number 18 and allow for consideration on public lands. And again, let me just underscore this term that I've just used is consideration, and that's all it is the consideration of that regarding the current law on mining on public lands. Again, I just wish to personally thank you for your continued work and efforts and for the opportunity to provide this testimony. As our staff have for the last 4 months, we will be sure to be here and be available to you at your work sessions to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.
Questions for the Commissioner? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Saviello, Representative Welch, and members of the committee. My name is Lou Kingsbury, and I live in Pittston, Maine. I'm going to try it a little differently this time. What you have before you is an excerpt from the rules that was issued by the BEP on January 3rd, 2014. A week later, these were the same rules that went to the legislature per the statute. And if you look down under mining excluded, The mining excluded rules that was provided by the DEP to the BEP can be found under paragraphs A, B, C, D, and G with no strike-throughs. They, in essence, precluded any mining on public lands in the state. So the original out of the box from the DEP was, you cannot mine on any public lands in the state. That was changed by EF and then ultimately E and D with the strike-throughs. That was done by the BEP. It was done as a minor substantive change. It didn't get any discussion by the committee. It didn't have any public input. It showed up on this date, 1/3/2014. Now, I believe somebody in the DEP that put all these rules together understood that there was a, and you've heard it from Jane Edwards, there was a constitutional amendment made, Article 9, Section 23 on the next page, that gave a rule that said that if you create a bill, 598, and you list all the designated lands, public lands under that bill, they are for conservation and recreational purposes only. But if you want to remove something from that list to use it for some other purpose, like mining, it takes a 2/3 vote of the elected members of each house. Now, we know that Dan, as legal analyst, went and reviewed all of these other laws that have been put into effect and found that none of them had been passed by a 2/3 majority vote. So, from my view, this still remains in effect. And what you should do is you should go back to the original DEP version of mining excluded, knowing that you have an ability to mine on public lands if you get a 2/3 vote of both houses. Thank you.
Do we keep going? You have more?
Oh, okay.
Question, Representative Tucker, do you have, wait, Ben, Lou, do you have more? Do you have
Yeah,
more?
I have one other thing.
Why don't you do that, one other thing, or you want to ask a question related to this? Okay.
Best
Okay,
if I
all right,
ask my
I'll just stop
question
the
now.
clock.
I'd like to go over our argument at lunch.
Yes.
Where I disagree with you. If you read that constitutional amendment, it says that the parkland that's held for conservation and recreation purpose, and it says, and designated by the legislature, okay? So the legislature decides which lands come under this 2/3 rule in the Constitution. So if you go to that statute below, where the legislature in a statute designated a list of lands, there's nothing that would prevent a majority in the legislature from altering that list. And therefore, your 2/3 just goes right down the drain.
They would have to alter 598.
Exactly.
Because 598 says, once so designated, however, it is the intent of the legislature that designated lands remain subject to the provisions of this section and the Constitution of Maine,
Yeah, but the legislature
until such time as the designation is repealed or limited by a 2/3 vote.
But the legislature decides which are the following lands, and that can be amended by a majority vote, and it evades completely the 2/3 requirement. The other thing is that the constitutional amendment says that these lands that are designated by the legislature, and I think can be designated on a majority basis, may not be reduced or its uses substantially altered. And I think you will have an argument that mining, particularly
Oh, that's $5.
particularly shaft mining, does not reduce or substantially alter public lands. So I don't think that you can just cite this constitutional provision and say mining will never happen on public lands.
Never in my career have I had an opportunity to debate anything with the former judge. So
And trust me, it's not worth it because you'll lose every time.
We well know.
I may
Isn't
be
that
at
so?
a disadvantage here.
Okay, do you want to make your second point, Lou?
And I think there could potentially be merit in your position. However, I will respectfully disagree.
All right, keep going.
Proceed.
All right, now, the very last page. This is a photo that I've passed out to this committee at least 5 times, and have never had really an opportunity to discuss what it is and its ramifications. This, too, was provided by the DEP at a BEP hearing by Jeff Crawford and Mark Stebbins, and what it was passed out and we were told it represented was a wet mine waste unit, but in reality, it is a tailings pond. Now, how do you know that one versus the other? Grade A waste in a wet mine waste unit has a clay liner covered by a plastic liner and covered by water. They have the same exact construction requirements. But if you look at the details of this, you will see that the waste in this picture is right on the surface. And the waste that comes out of beneficiation units, the mills, is very fine in nature. It's a dust that comes out. And once water has been absorbed into it, it becomes a paste-like element. Now, we heard from Attorney Jim Butler earlier in his testimony that this can be dewatered. And I questioned him after his public testimony on that, and he said he had walked on the caps of 12 such dewatered units out where he comes from. Well, I did a little research on that, and I found one mine tailings pond that actually did dry out, but it wasn't by dewatering, it was by evaporation. His experience was out in New Mexico in a desert where there's very little water, it's very dry, and the things dry out on their own. In this state, where we have an average of about 50 inches of rain a year, you are never going to be able to suck the water out of these tailings, which have a paste-like consistency. You're just not going to do it. And now, you say, well, how do you know? I mean, who the heck are you? McKay School of Mines developed the wet mine waste units and the tailings ponds and all of these things, right? I learned that from Lindsay Bowker. And so I did some investigation there, made a couple of phone calls. And nowhere in their data do they say that tailings ponds can be dewatered. So I want you to take under advisement that if you consider that you can have tailings ponds and wet mine waste units up until the time of closure, and then you're going to dewater them, it's a fool's errand. Those are designed to be permanent facilities.
You do need to finish up.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, Representative Duchesne.
Thank you, Senator. Well, I gave you an hour and 15 minutes to think about it. What if next year some of us put in a bill just bans mining? And remember, the ACF committee would get the bill because it's Title 12. They can decide whether to ban it, do a 2/3 vote, or retain your concept of a 2/3 vote, whether that's really valid or not, or allow mining and clean up that whole section of statute so it's consistent. Would that be acceptable to you?
And let me clarify.
On public lands.
right,
On public
right,
lands.
right, right.
On public lands.
I like the first version a little better. In the current political climate, and I was a government major at Colby and have worked on a number.
So far.
All right, you are never going to get that across the governor's desk without a veto, and then you're never going to get an override. So it's a nice thing to say, but politically, it's never going to happen.
But Representative Duchesne would make a promise that he would introduce that legislation in 2018. Isn't that so?
If I'm still around.
Thank you.
That's a concern.
That he's still around? I'm sorry.
Hey, I'm doing stand-up. I mean, what are you
You're doing
doing?
pretty good. Except you're digging a deeper hole. Any questions? Lou, thank you.
All right. Ellery Keene.
Hillary, did he leave?
Ellery went with Jane.
He did go home with Jane.
But he left.
He left testimony.
Okay. Is that, because I was looking, no, that's Lorenz, okay. Bill Dunham.
Bill's gone home.
Okay. Don Abbott.